us now look at the scope of the project. I had made an earlier discussion like the triple constraints in the projects are the scope, the schedule, and the budget, or it is also called the cost. We also know the knowledge areas like the scope management, schedule management, cost management, and you also have the quality management. So all this, that is budgets, schedule, and scope, contribute to the quality of the product or project, the outcome of the project. You have a right scope, the right schedule, and right cost, and it is going as per the track, then yes, the quality will be by on the expected standards. If the scope is doesn't have a clarity, there is a lot of ambiguity, then if there is something added additionally in the scope without without increasing the cost or without increasing the duration of the project, then the quality will suffer. So these three, that is schedule, cost, and the scope, or triple constraints, need to be managed effectively. And apart from that, the other knowledge areas like you have the HR management, communication, stakeholders, procurement, risk, are all basically trying to support and ensure that the project scope, schedule, and cost are all aligned and ensures that no, there is no deviations in them. So it's a kind of a, I would say, all others are more of a supporting knowledge areas or a process wherein the project is as per the scope, schedule, and cost. So now that we know that there is triple constraints are the primary in the project, let's understand what is the scope in a project. So identify confirms the project needs and the objectives, and the scope of the work needs to be easily in understandable terms, and it should be, more importantly, the scope should be like agreed upon with all the stakeholders of the project. The stakeholders of the project could be the vendors, your customers, your project team, even at times the it may happen even the statutory organizations like government, and it should have some kind of a understanding with all the stakeholders. So this is an example. You might building a website, building just saying that I'll build a website is generic. So you need to say how many pages you are going to have and what kind of a software tool with that you are going to achieve, whether it is going to be commercially commercial transactions are enabled like your Amazon website. So all this, instead of, it should not be something like, okay, I'll be building a website. It should be clearly define what is going to be achieved out of it, the number of pages, functionalities, and many more, so that there is no ambiguity, there is clarity. And similarly, if you're building some engineering plant, so it should clearly mention what is the space, what is the capacity, in how many days it is going to be done. All these details should be defined in the scope of the work. And finally, yeah, what are the deliverables and what are the acceptance? Is there any kind of a testing which is going to be performed by the stakeholders to accept it? So all this needs to be clearly defined in the scope of the project. It is also better if there are any ambiguities, clearly mention that these are not in the scope of the project. So that needs to be clearly mentioned as well. Say for example, if you're doing a enterprise resource planning project, ERP project, the data for that project towards configuration needs to be provided by the client for whom the ERP implementation is going to be done. And if they don't provide that data, then you cannot implement the ERP project. So that is kind of a dependency, number one. Number two, it is providing the data for towards the configuration is not in scope of the implementation team. It is in the scope of the corresponding client team who has to provide the data towards the configuration. Data might be like your customer setup, your vendor setup, who is the vendor, who is the customer, all these names needs to be provided by the client team for whom the ERP is going to be implemented. So scope plays a critical role if there is, as I said, if there is Going to be ambiguities in the definition of the scope. If it is, if when once you have ambiguity, then yes, at a later stage during the execution, the client might say, okay, we said this is also needs to be in the scope of the project, and then all the firefighting will happen. That is called a scope creep also, because there was ambiguity in the scope definition. Because of that, scope creep could always happen. So ensure that in a project the scope is properly done. Thank you. Let's now look at what is a scope creep and goal plating. This is very common in the project management. You might hear particularly the scope creep. So what is the scope creep? So basically it's about accommodating the requirement changes in the scope and thereby leading to uncontrolled growth in scope. So some changes was probably requested orally or by the users. If that change is, even though it is not there as per the original scope, if that is accommodated, then it is a scope creep. So this happens when the scope is not clearly defined or not controlled or documented, not clearly defined in sense like if there are ambiguities, either it could be this or that. So in that case also, because there is ambiguity in the scope part, yes, the scope creep can happen. Sometimes this image clearly indicates just a small effort. So a client may say it's a small effort, why don't you accommodate that? Then without looking, it might be small effort, but still it involves cost and time. Particularly one need to, if there are going to be integrations, then probably it needs to be tested across the different layers, or you call it as a modules. Proper testing needs to be done. So which can probably at a later point of time, it can hit the system. So even though it could be a small effort, that needs to be accounted for, and that needs to be controlled. So ideally this should go through the change request. So the other one is goal plating. This is equally bad, just like a scope creep. So this is something like adding extra functions or features in the product intentionally. This word, look at the way this is intentionally added, which are not defined in scope. This is also bad. Just to please the customer, if you're going to add, what will happen is ultimately customer may at some point of time may again come back and ask you to add some more thing, some more additional features. So that could lead to the scope creep. The point to note here is that it will not only lead to scope creep, but it can at times dilute the need for the change request and change request approval process. It could dilute. So because since you've done something, they can, I mean, customer or client can always say that, yeah, why don't you do this also? That will make me happy. So that way, the gold plating is equally bad, just like a scope creep as well. A point to note here is scope creep and even gold plating could rise cost and schedule. The time could increase that. Though immediately might not be known, but as you progress in the project, maybe as I said, across modules or across layers, somewhere could get impacted if it is probably, I mean, not in control. That is where it could go out of control, and it could escalate clearly all the cost and schedule. So this needs to be, scope is very important. It needs to be controlled without scope creep and without gold plating. So what are the recommendations? So clearly well-managed scope is a key element to a successful project. Scope statement should include both features which is in and which is out of scope, which is not in scope. That needs to be mentioned also, so that there is a clarity as what is not scope of a people who is, I mean, by the party who is delivering it should mention that this is not in our scope, this is in the other person's scope, a different team, or if it is a vendor customer relation, what is in vendor scope, what is in customer scope. So that needs to be brought out clearly. Then the robust work breakdown structure decomposes deliverables work package. So Clearly, there need to be detailed work breakdown structure. What is the schedule? What is going to be the cost of it? So particularly, you need to maybe assign a milestone to it. Maybe if you can assign payment milestone. So, but the point is, yes, the work breakdown structure, there needs to be enough clarity, which is agreed upon by the all the stakeholders. And business analyst or the functional consultant contribute to clear scope, effective requirement elicitation, and by analyzing and documenting clear, complete, and concise requirement. So the functionality should be clearly defined as what is going to do. The next step is by the maybe the system analyst or the technical folks who take or the technical lead, and particularly in the software project, they need to clearly document the models diagram like the process flow models, use case diagram. So all this, even the, I mean, for the technical folks, when they get into programming, even the database, the database needs to database design itself is a quite a big task. The database, even if you're having a robust system, if the database design is not done properly, then as the volume of data grows, this is very common. The volume of data grows, there could be performance issues in the database. Performance issue in the sense when you want to transact an entry, when you want to make a transaction using the system, it may take a long time. That is because the performance issues are there with the database. So all this, I mean, the scope clarity should be there so that you don't have a scope creep, and gold plating is also not there. Thank you. Stay tuned.